A black millionaire disguised himself as poor to meet his fiancée's racist parents. When the parents served dinner, he was horrified by what he saw on his plate. James discreetly adjusted his watch while observing the movement in the charity event hall, a gathering of important societal figures supporting a noble cause. The soft light reflected in his eyes, revealing an expression of curiosity and caution. As he passed one of the art exhibitions, his gaze was captured by the presence of Sarah, who was conversing with a friend about the social impact of charity, a topic that aligned with James' own values. Do you really believe these events make a difference in our current society? Do you think they have any positive impact? James interrupted, approaching with a friendly smile. Sarah turned, surprised, but quickly responded with enthusiasm. I believe they can, but it greatly depends on who's behind them and how the resources are managed. Don't you think it's sometimes more about showing off than genuinely helping? The sincerity in her voice and the direct way she addressed the topic intrigued James. Sometimes I think exactly that, James affirmed. I see many of these events in my line of work. I own a chain of restaurants, and we're frequently asked to sponsor these events. I always wonder if we're really making a difference or just participating in a show. James' confession was genuine, reflecting his desire to do more than just contribute financially. Sarah looked at James with new interest, perceiving that he was not just another businessman. That's interesting. You have businesses that could truly impact positively, depending on how you use them. What do you think we could do better? That question sparked a deep discussion about responsibility in business, as another common factor between them was the high net worth of both families due to large investments. I often think about inviting people to help, especially those who are not involved in this kind of action just because of social obligation, James explained while guiding Sarah to a quieter corner of the hall where they could talk more comfortably. One of the events I participate in most is against the smuggling of endangered species in our country. I'm a vegetarian, and I hate that there are people who continue to threaten rare species. The evening progressed, but their conversation only deepened. James was increasingly convinced that Sarah was not only an intelligent and attractive woman, but someone with whom he could truly share not just a future, but also a purpose. As time passed, the relationship between Sarah and James evolved from a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests to a deep and committed romance. They spent more and more time together, sharing dreams, challenges, and laughter as their love grew. It was a natural process, almost imperceptible, as if each moment together simply confirmed that they were destined to be side by side. The conversation revolved around Sarah's future plans, and her parents always had strong opinions on the matter. Sarah, you know you deserve someone of your level, someone who can offer you the lifestyle you're accustomed to, Helen said, passing the salad dressing. Sarah sighed, knowing her parents viewed the world through visions that overly valued money. I understand, Mom, but I think the most important thing is finding someone who truly understands and shares my values, not just my social status and those other superficial things you both seem to value so much, Sarah responded, trying to steer the conversation away from money and status. Richard looked at her with a penetrating gaze, clearly unconvinced. Values don't pay the bills, Sarah. You need to think about the future, about stability. That's what really matters in the end, he insisted, hoping his daughter would see reality as he did. Sarah knew that telling the truth about the man she had just met, James, who was very wealthy, could calm her parents, but she preferred to keep that secret. She wanted that if they ever had something more serious, her parents would approve of James for who he was, not for what his money could represent for the family. James is an incredible man. He's attentive and has a great vision of the world. He makes me really happy, Sarah explained, hoping her parents would someday see beyond material things. Meanwhile, James was in a jewelry store, choosing an engagement ring for Sarah. He wanted something that symbolized their journey together, something as unique and beautiful as the love he felt for her. After much searching, he found the perfect ring, a delicate piece with an elegant design that he knew Sarah would adore. With the ring secure in his pocket, he planned a special moment to propose. The big day arrived. James had planned a candlelight dinner at the restaurant where they had their first official date. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the flowers to the music softly playing in the background. When the main course was served, James took Sarah's hand. Sarah, since I met you, My life has changed for the better. You've inspired me to be a better person, to dream bigger, and to love more deeply," he began, his voice filled with emotion. Her heart raced, listening to every word with a mix of surprise and joy. James continued, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, facing all challenges together and sharing all joys. Sarah, will you marry me?" With tears in her eyes and a smile that lit up the room, Sarah responded without hesitation, "Yes, James, 1,000 times yes." The moment was magical, the kind of scene Sarah had imagined but never expected to come true. She knew challenges were coming, especially with her parents, but at that instant, all that mattered was the love and bright future she and James would build together. As the two celebrated, everyone in the elegant restaurant toasted to them in true love. Seated together on the small terrace of Sarah's apartment, James broached the subject delicately. "Sarah, I'd like to formally ask your father for your hand in marriage. It would be important for me to have your parents' blessing," James said, hoping for a positive response. Sarah, however, hesitated, looking away toward the horizon. "James, I'm not sure if now is the best time for you to meet my parents. They are a bit traditional and very demanding." Her voice trembled slightly as she tried to hide her anxiety with a forced smile. James sensed her hesitation and felt a weight of uncertainty forming in his chest. Why was she so reluctant to introduce him to them? Was Sarah afraid he wouldn't meet their expectations, or was there something else she wasn't telling him? James reflected on Sarah's previous interactions, recalling how she rarely mentioned her parents except to highlight their high expectations. Maybe they really were very rigid, or perhaps Sarah feared they might disapprove of their union for a reason she had yet to reveal. Trying to ease the tension, Sarah quickly changed the subject. "Have you seen the latest news about that exotic animal smuggling scandal? It's horrible to think there are people out there selling meat from endangered animals. I'm glad you're always on the right side of the law, doing what you can to help," she said, trying to steer the conversation to less personal territory. James nodded, but his concerns still clouded his mind. "Yes, it's really reprehensible. I could never understand how someone gets involved in something so horrible. We'll do what we can through our restaurants to ensure that none of that is supported by us." "But Sarah," James looked directly into her eyes, seeking truth in her expression, "please, don't change the subject. It's important to me. Why are you so reluctant to bring me to meet your parents?" Sarah sighed, knowing she couldn't avoid the conversation much longer. "James, my parents are really complicated. They have this idea that I should be with someone of a certain level, someone who can elevate our status even further. They're extremely conservative and judgmental. I'm afraid they'll judge you solely based on your humble origins before you made your fortune," she confessed, anguish clear in her voice. "But I'm rich now, Sarah. Wouldn't that be enough to convince them if that's really the big problem for me finally meeting them?" James asked, trying to understand. "It's not that simple. For them, it's not just about money. It's about lineage and connections. They're very strict and demanding about everything. I just don't want you to be hurt or rejected by them." "I know how venomous they can be," Sarah explained. James, feeling a mix of frustration and understanding in his gaze, decided he would respect Sarah's timing but knew that eventually he would have to face that barrier. His love for her demanded it, and he was prepared to prove his worth not just as a successful businessman, but as the man who truly loved Sarah. One day, James was checking the arrangement of cutlery and glasses in one of his restaurants, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, which was his habit to maintain a low profile and be approachable. As he moved among the tables, ensuring everything was perfect for the evening, a middle-aged couple caught his attention. They seemed to be looking for something specific on the menu, murmuring to each other with expressions of curiosity and expectation. Approaching with a smile, James asked if he could help with a recommendation. "We were curious about exotic meats you might offer," the man said, looking him up and down and assuming James was a waiter. "Sure, we have several exotic options that are completely legal and approved for consumption here in Mexico," James explained, maintaining a friendly and professional tone. "For example, we have venison and wild boar, both quite popular for their unique textures and flavors. And of course, all our suppliers are certified to ensure sustainability and legality." The woman seemed intrigued and asked about more exotic meats, perhaps those not permitted. Sensing the direction of the conversation, James was quick to clarify. We have to be very careful with regulations. For example, meats like armadillo or certain exotic birds are prohibited in the country. We don't support any products that violate wildlife protection laws. Impressed with his knowledge and respectful handling of the matter, the couple nodded in approval before moving away. James, driven by curiosity and instinct, casually asked, "May I know your names? I like to address my customers by name." "We are Richard and Helen. We have lived in this city for many years, but it's our first time in this restaurant. We're ready to place our order, in fact," the man replied with a slight air of pride that did not convey much friendliness. Upon hearing their names, a suspicion grew in James' heart. "You wouldn't happen to be Sarah's parents, would you? She told me about her parents and their names, and it would be quite a coincidence if you had the same names as hers." With a mix of surprise and caution, Helen confirmed, "Yes, we are her parents. How do you know about us? Why are you talking about us too? I hope you're treating our daughter well if you're really friends, or something since you know the names of her parents." Taking a deep breath, James decided to introduce himself. "I apologize for the initial confusion. I didn't want to leave you confused. I'm James. I work with food, and more importantly, I'm Sarah's fiancé. I'd very much like to have dinner together, perhaps to officially get to know each other." Richard and Helen exchanged somewhat surprised glances, but accepted the invitation. "Let's say it would be a pleasure to have you at our home in the near future, Mr. James," Richard said, although his voice carried a note of reservation. After James walked away, the murmurs between Richard and Helen were far from positive. "How could Sarah get involved with someone we mistook for a waiter?" Richard criticized in a low voice. "He seems decent, but definitely not what we expected for her," Helen added, disappointed. The night of the dinner finally arrived. Sarah was in the kitchen, helping her mother, Helen, prepare a traditional dish for dinner when Richard, her father, entered the room with a more serious posture than usual. "Sarah, we need to talk about something important," he announced, pulling out a chair to sit face to face with her. Helen paused her activities, wiping her hands on her apron while watching the interaction, a slight frown of concern marking her forehead. "What happened, Dad? You don't usually act like this in any situation," Sarah asked, feeling a knot forming in her stomach. She could tell from her father's tone of voice that the conversation would be more serious than a simple, everyday discussion. Richard sighed, choosing his words carefully, but his frustration was palpable. "Today, while visiting one of the city's restaurants, we met James. He approached us, introduced himself as a worker there, and more surprisingly, as your fiancé. Sarah, why did we have to find out about your engagement this way? Why did you keep this from us?" Sarah felt the weight of her father's words. She had hesitated to tell her parents about the engagement, fearing exactly this reaction. "I was trying to find the right moment to talk to you. I wanted you to get to know James better first, so that you could see for yourselves how wonderful he is. I didn't want prejudiced judgments to affect him negatively," she explained, her voice trembling with the tension of the moment. Helen intervened softly, trying to mediate the conversation. "We understand that you want to protect your relationship, dear, but we are your family. We should have been some of the first people to know. Being surprised like this puts us in an awkward position." Sarah lowered her head, feeling torn between her love for James and respect for her parents. "I understand, and I'm very sorry for this. It won't happen again. I just wanted to do things the right way, and he wanted to ask you for my hand respectfully." Richard, still dissatisfied but deciding to move forward, changed the focus of the conversation. "Well, since he invited us to dinner, I'll take responsibility for the menu. I want to make sure everything is perfect." With a gesture, he dismissed the women from the kitchen. As soon as Helen and Sarah left, Richard headed to the basement where he had a special freezer for selected meats. Opening it, he rummaged to find exactly what he was looking for: packages of exotic meat that he occasionally acquired through dubious contacts. "This will impress our culinary know-it-all," he muttered to himself with a malicious smile on his face. "Let's see if he can identify these pieces. It will be a real lesson in humility for him," he continued, planning a dinner that he believed would be unforgettable, completely unaware of the potential conflict his choices could provoke. The sun was already beginning to set when James arrived at Sarah's residence. Dressed simply but elegantly, he opted for a light linen shirt and cotton pants, a notable contrast to the luxurious environment awaiting him. Sarah, visibly anxious, opened the door and was perplexed to see him. "James, what are you doing dressed like that for dinner with my parents? They're very demanding and expect formality. I didn't even know this dinner was going to happen in the first place," she said, concern clear in her voice as she looked at his casual attire. James smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Trust me, Sarah. I want them to see me for who I really am, not just as an image I can project. I'll win them over with my sincerity and respect, not my clothes," he explained, trying to calm her nerves. Reluctantly, Sarah nodded, leading him inside. Dinner was about to begin, and the atmosphere was tense. The dining room was meticulously decorated with fine porcelain and gleaming silverware, reflecting her parents' sophisticated and materialistic taste. Richard and Helen greeted James with a cold handshake and a forced smile, clearly judging his simplistic appearance. During dinner, the conversation was superficial, with Richard and Helen discussing recent social events and their luxurious travels. James remained polite, responding when necessary and keeping his focus on Sarah, who was clearly uncomfortable with the tension between her two worlds. Finally, the main course was served. James watched as the waiter placed the main dish in front of him, but something caught his attention and made his eyes nearly pop out of their sockets. He noticed that the plate contained exotic meats that he immediately recognized as potentially illegal. His mind began to whirl with suspicions and concerns. "This looks like meat from protected species I'm studying in the course. How did they get this? Are they involved in smuggling?" he wondered, horrified at the possibility that his future in-laws were involved in such dark activities. Still, he maintained his composure, moving the meat to the side of the plate while eating the accompaniments. The meal continued, and he felt the weight of each bite, the discomfort growing inside him. Noticing that James wasn't touching the meat, Richard finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "James, I noticed you didn't eat the meat. Is something wrong? Given your vast experience with restaurants, I thought you'd appreciate our rather different choices." "I hoped you'd try to guess what this piece is," Richard asked, with a tone of challenge mixed with curiosity. About that," James began, choosing his words carefully. "I really appreciate the effort, and it's true I know quite a bit about meats, but recently I adopted a vegetarian diet for health and ethical reasons," he explained, trying to keep the atmosphere as light as possible. Helen, surprised, arched an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by this revelation. "Interesting. How do you maintain your knowledge about meat while being a vegetarian?" she asked, looking at James with a mix of skepticism and interest. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications and curiosity. As James pondered how to respond, knowing that each word could drastically alter the dynamics of that night. "The more I delve into the subject, the more justifiable the idea of being vegetarian seems. It's a very personal decision," he said. As dinner neared its end, the atmosphere remained charged, a mix of formality and unspoken tensions. James, maintaining his composure throughout the night, bid Richard and Helen goodbye with a polite handshake and a smile that barely concealed his unease. Sarah accompanied James to the door, noticing the serious expression on his face. "James, are you okay? You seemed a bit distant after the main course," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I wasn't expecting the person who arranged this dinner without telling me to stay so quiet in front of my parents. I don't know whether to congratulate you or scold you," Sarah added, her voice tinged with worry. James hesitated for a moment before responding. "Sarah, I know this will sound crazy, but the meat served at dinner, I think it might be smuggled. Some of those meats are not only exotic, they're totally illegal in our country." Sarah looked at him incredulously, her eyebrows arched in surprise. "James, that's impossible. My parents have been involved in anti-smuggling campaigns for years. They're some of the biggest donors to organizations that protect wildlife." "You must be mistaken," she replied, her voice firm, trying to convince him that there was a mistake. "I understand why it seems improbable, Sarah, but something's not right. My knowledge of meats tells me those were not common. I'll do whatever it takes to prove what I'm saying. If I'm wrong, I promise I'll apologize to them and never bring it up again," James asserted, clear determination in his voice. Sarah, still not believing any of it, just nodded. Okay, James, do what you need to do. But don't make up anything too complex or dangerous. She closed the door behind him, doubt and worry mixed in her gaze as she watched him leave. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Richard and Helen conversed about the dinner. I think the dinner was a success. Despite James' surprising dietary choices, Helen commented, picking up the plates. Richard laughed a low, confident laugh. Yes, although I would have liked to see his expression if he knew what was really on his plate. I serve pangolin, you know, a rare delicacy. And yes, an endangered species, but our suppliers can get anything, Richard replied. Examining his phone for updates from his associates, Helen looked around, ensuring they were alone before responding. And the pangolins we received last week, how's that situation? I know many die during transport since our carriers are closely watched by the police. They're safe in our secret location. Our contacts in Asia continue to supply, and the demand here only grows. This smuggling business is becoming very lucrative, more than any donation we make to silence environmental organizations, Richard said, scrolling through his phone for updates. Helen smiled, satisfied with the confirmation. We just need to keep this out of the spotlight. The donations are an excellent cover. No one suspects wildlife defenders when they're running a smuggling operation like the one we have. The conversation made it clear that despite their appearances and reputation as wildlife defenders, Richard and Helen were deeply involved in a smuggling scheme, using their influence and resources to disguise their true activities. As they cleaned the kitchen, both reflected on the success of their illicit enterprise, ignoring the potential consequences if their actions were discovered. In the days following the dinner, James was consumed with the need to uncover the truth about Sarah's parents' suspicious activities. He spent hours in his office, surrounded by notes and maps, searching for information about smuggling routes and possible locations for illegal animal storage. His obsession was palpable, with each clue and detail meticulously analyzed in search of concrete proof. Sarah, noticing James' growing obsession, found him one afternoon surrounded by papers and aerial photos of a remote area he suspected was a smuggling point. James, this is going too far, she began, her worry evident in every word. You're letting this consume your life. Please, think about what you're doing. My parents aren't criminals. You're putting yourself in danger for something that's not true. James looked at her with tired eyes but still firm determination. Sarah, I found a place that could be the key to all of this. It's an isolated area with records of suspicious activities near Milford Road. I need to see it up close. No, James, you don't need to do that. Sarah raised her voice, frustration and fear evident in her tone. It's dangerous, and if something happens to you, I can't lose you over a suspicion. I need you here, safe. Please, promise me you won't go. Seeing the genuine distress in Sarah, James sighed, feeling the weight of her words. All right, I promise I won't go. I won't do anything that might worry you or put us at risk, he said, although a part of him still screamed to move forward. Meanwhile, in the hidden shed deep in a dense forest, Richard and Helen visited a clandestine complex where exotic animals were kept before being sold on the black market. The facilities were extensive, well hidden under the forest cover, with multiple cages housing everything from rare birds to exotic mammals. We need to ensure everything stays under control, especially now that James is asking questions, Richard said, inspecting the facilities with a critical eye. He's smarter than we initially expected. Helen, beside him, observed a group of caged pangolins. It's a shame that Sarah got involved with someone as curious and bothersome as that man. We need to keep this away from her, for her sake and ours. We can't predict how she'd react to all this. She can't know. Richard agreed, thoughtfully. Her ignorance about our business has been a blessing. And as for James, we need to divert his attention. Maybe it's time to use our contacts to permanently calm his suspicions. The two walked through the site, discussing not only daily operations but also potential strategies to deal with the threat James posed. Each step they took among the silent animals was a reminder of what was at stake and how far they were willing to go to protect what they had built. Driven by a sense of justice and the need to uncover the truth, James ignored Sarah's pleas and decided to visit the suspicious location alone. Before leaving, he meticulously prepared his equipment, including a high-definition camera, a voice recorder, and his phone charged with several extra batteries. He dressed in dark, sturdy clothes, appropriate for not drawing attention and for the potentially rough terrain of the site. His heart beat with a mix of determination and nerves as he drove to the address he had discovered. Upon arrival, James parked his car at a safe distance and approached on foot, staying hidden behind dense vegetation. The complex was quiet, but activity was clearly visible in the fading light of the evening. From afar, he saw Richard and Helen supervising the transfer of some large boxes to a vehicle. Without hesitation, he began filming, making sure to capture every detail, every suspicious movement. Richard, Helen, how can you live with yourselves, deceiving everyone around you? You're smugglers and liars, James shouted, staying hidden but ensuring his voice was heard. This is going to end. Sarah will know who you really are. She will be disappointed and horrified by your actions. Hearing the shouts, Richard and Helen looked alarmed in his direction, quickly signaling to some burly men waiting near one of the sheds. Within minutes, James was captured and, without much ceremony, locked in a large cage that once housed exotic animals. Fighting against the panic that began to set in, James watched as the couple approached. Do you really think you can threaten us, James? You have no idea who you're dealing with, Richard said with calculated coldness. Helen, looking at James with a mix of pity and disdain, added, We're going to resolve this in our own way. A millionaire can be useful, and we can get a good sum if we discover you're the owner of the restaurant chain. Just by looking for someone's name in the investigations, we'll find out. Realizing the gravity of his situation, James began to understand the extent of the smuggling scheme. He looked around, seeing the animals in small cages, and felt a wave of sadness and compassion for those innocent creatures. His heart tightened, thinking about their suffering, and a deep anger grew inside him against those who profited from such cruelty. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had returned home to look for the keys to one of her parents' NGO offices, was searching the house for the keychain that seemed to have disappeared. She rifled through drawers, looked under papers, and searched among the books on the shelves, increasingly frustrated by the difficulty in finding what she needed. The silence of the house amplified her anxiety, each second seeming to stretch as she continued her desperate search. Sarah checked the drawers in the living room once more, her heart pounding with the growing sense that something was wrong. Every possible place where the keys could be had been meticulously searched, but without success. With a heavy sigh, she decided to call her father, hoping he might have a clue about the keys' whereabouts or might have taken them by mistake. She picked up her phone, her fingers urgently sliding across the screen until she found her father's number. As the phone rang, she tried to control her breathing, preparing to stay calm during the conversation. "Dad," she began as soon as he answered, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "I'm looking for the keys to the NGO office and can't find them anywhere. Have you seen them around? I really need them." On the other end of the line, Richard responded with a voice that seemed strangely rushed and somewhat breathless, immediately raising more suspicion in Sarah. "Oh, Sarah dear, I'm home now and looked around quickly when you mentioned the keys, but I didn't see anything here. Maybe you left them somewhere else. You know how things like this just disappear sometimes." Sarah frowned, confused by her father's quick and somewhat evasive response. She was about to insist on the oddness of the situation when a muffled scream pierced the background silence of the call. It was a familiar voice, desperate and clear even at a distance. It was James, without a doubt. "Dad, what was that? I heard someone scream. Is everything okay there? I'd like you to tell me where you really are right now," Sarah questioned, anxiety growing exponentially with each beat of her heart. Realizing he might have made a mistake by not checking his surroundings before answering the call, Richard quickly responded, trying to cover up any concern. Don't worry, dear. It must have been the television. I was watching a movie here. You know how loud those action movies can be." But before Sarah could process the response and question further, the call abruptly cut off, leaving her with the phone still in her hand and a sense of dread. Fear and concern for James' well-being, combined with the suspicion that her father was lying, spurred her into action. She quickly dialed the police, reporting her concern. "Please, I need someone to go to the location on the Old Milford Road. My fiancé might be in danger. He mentioned this area before, suspecting illegal activities. After passing the information to the police, Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed her car keys and drove as fast as she could to the indicated location, her heart tight with anxiety and fear of the unknown. Meanwhile, at the isolated site, James was trapped in a cage, facing Richard and Helen. "What are you going to do with me now? Sarah will soon notice my absence and come looking for me," James questioned, trying to stay calm despite the desperate circumstances. Helen looked at Richard before responding, her voice cold and calculated. "We haven't decided yet. Maybe we should keep you as a hostage, demand a ransom, or perhaps convince you to work for us. There are so many options, it's hard to choose just one." In the city, Sarah, her heart racing, drove at top speed to the location James had indicated. When she arrived, her car skidded on the gravel as she braked sharply. Getting out of the car, her breathing was heavy, her eyes scanning the area frantically for any sign of James. As she approached the warehouse, Richard and Helen, who had seen her arrival through the security cameras, came out to meet her with forcefully calm expressions. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Helen asked, trying to hide the tension in her voice. "I came to get something I forgot, but what are you both doing here? You said you were at home, and I've heard this place has a dubious reputation with some smuggling reports." Sarah fired off the questions quickly, her suspicion evident in every word. Richard tried to remain calm. "We're here simply to see this warehouse being auctioned by the municipality after a major investigation, nothing more. We're thinking of buying it to expand the NGO's activities," he said, evasive about the details. "And why did you lie, saying you were at home when you weren't? And why are you in a place with so many smuggling reports? And why did James scream my name in the middle of our call? Dad? Where is he?" Sarah's questions were like sharp arrows, direct and piercing. The parents exchanged nervous glances, unable to formulate convincing answers. It was then that a distant scream broke the silence once more, James' voice calling for Sarah. Without waiting for a response, she ran toward the sound, her parents hesitating to follow her. Sarah found James trapped in a cage, tears in her eyes and trembling hands quickly unlocking the door. James emerged, his eyes meeting hers, both relieved to be together again, but still wrapped in the tension of the moment. Richard and Helen approached, reprimanding Sarah's interference. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah. This is entirely our business and no one else's. You shouldn't have gotten involved in this," Helen said, her voice failing in an attempt at authority. Sarah, now standing next to James, her anger and disappointment boiling to the surface, faced her parents. "How could you do this? Lies, smuggling, putting James in a cage. This is unacceptable. You are my parents, but what you did here is horrible. You should be held accountable. You should protect, not cause harm. Look, the police are outside. You better leave another way if you don't want to be arrested," she said firmly, her heart broken by the betrayal. James, confused and still trying to understand the situation, asked her as her parents hurried to leave. "Why are you saving them from finally being punished for their actions against endangered species? They lied to you. They're criminals." Sarah looked back, watching her parents' figures disappear into the darkness. "Despite everything, they are still my parents. I can't hurt them. They're the only family I have left," she said, her voice laden with emotion and a certain weight that James still didn't understand. He stood there, observing Sarah, reflecting on her last words, "The only family I have left." What did she mean by that? What other losses had she faced? The night still held many questions, and as the sounds of sirens began to echo in the distance, the weight of the revelations was only beginning to unfold. After the tense night at the warehouse, the police managed to capture all the smugglers working with Richard and Helen, who, however, managed to escape back to the comfort of their home. Sarah and James tried to console each other, attempting to process the recent events. James sat next to Sarah on the couch, holding her hands in his. "I never imagined all this would happen, Sarah. When I saw what was going on, all I wanted was to protect you," he said, his voice full of concern and affection. Sarah, visibly affected and still in shock, struggled to find words. "I just can't believe it, James. My parents were involved in something so horrible. How could I not see it? How could I be so blind? She shook her head, tears starting to stream down her face. James hugged her, offering the comfort he could. You had no way of knowing, Sarah. They hid it from everyone. You need to know that you're not at all responsible for their absurd and totally irresponsible acts against nature. Only they are to blame for this. Then James, remembering something Sarah had mentioned earlier, asked softly, Sarah, you mentioned something about losing part of your family. Can you tell me more about that? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. A few years ago, part of my family was on a private plane that crashed. Everyone on board died. They were my uncles, cousins. I was devastated. The only relatives I have left are in another country, and we lost contact a long time ago. Since then, my parents are all I have. James squeezed her hand, his heart heavy with her pain. I'm so sorry, Sarah, but you must know that when we get married, we'll form our own family, one based on love, honesty, and respect. However, we still need to ensure that justice is done. What your parents did is unforgivable, and they must be held accountable for it. Sarah nodded, determination beginning to replace the shock. You're right, James. We need to do something to hold my parents accountable and show them the right way to live. I know their upbringing was bad, but that doesn't justify treating animals poorly. It was then that James suggested a trap to capture her parents. We can make them think you broke up with me because I meddled in the family's business. We can call them for a meeting, saying you want to discuss something important. Sarah agreed, seeing the opportunity to finally bring her parents to justice. Okay, we'll do exactly that. I'll call them to meet me in the city park. They won't suspect anything, and we'll have the police on our side to capture them and anyone else who tries to defend them. In the following days, they carefully planned every detail. Sarah made the call, her voice trembling but convincing, while James and the police prepared in strategic positions around the meeting place. On the appointed day, Sarah sat on a park bench, nervously waiting for her parents' arrival. James watched from a distance, along with the police team hidden among the trees and bushes. The air was tense with the expectation of the impending confrontation, and Sarah held her phone with trembling hands, ready to give the signal as soon as she spotted Richard and Helen approaching. The day was cloudy, and a cold breeze rustled the leaves of the trees in the park where Sarah had arranged to meet her parents. Sitting on an isolated bench, she watched the path leading to the location, her heart beating fast as she awaited Richard and Helen's arrival. James, along with the police team, observed from a safe distance, ready to intervene at the right moment. When Sarah saw her parents approaching, she took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. As soon as they arrived, Richard and Helen's expressions were of concern, but also relief to see Sarah alone. Dear, why did you want to see us here? And where's that meddling fiancé of yours, James? I thought you were always together now that you almost replaced us with him yesterday, Helen asked in a soft voice, trying to probe the situation. Sarah looked at her parents with a serious expression. I needed to talk to you away from any interruptions. About James, actually, I broke up with him, and it was something very recent, she began, observing her parents' reactions closely. He discovered things about your business, about the smuggling. I didn't know what to do. I was confused, but after thinking a lot, I decided that I want to help you. We need to resolve this together, Sarah said, seeking to obtain a confession. Helen and Richard exchanged worried glances. Then Richard approached Sarah, lowering his voice. Sarah, you did the right thing coming to us. We'll resolve this, but you need to understand that everything we did was to ensure the best for our family. Helen, feeling more confident, added, we can find a way out together. Maybe we can even bring James to our side if he's willing to understand the reasons behind what we do, but only if he has an open mind for it. Before they could continue, Sarah gave a discreet signal to James, who was attentively listening to the conversation. Within seconds, police officers emerged from their hiding spots and quickly approached Richard and Helen, who were visibly shocked. What's going on here? It can't be that our own daughter set us up. We can't trust anyone, Richard exclaimed as the police announced they were being arrested for their involvement in animal smuggling. As they were handcuffed, Richard looked furiously at James, who was now approaching. You convinced her, didn't you? It had to be you. You're very rich now, but you come from a very humble family, which clearly reflects in you. "You've corrupted our own daughter against us," Richard accused. James remained calm despite the accusations. Sarah, on the other hand, began to cry, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. James hugged her, offering comfort while her parents were taken away. "You did the right thing, Sarah. This is about justice, about doing the right thing even though it's difficult," James said softly. Sarah, still in James' embrace, watched as her parents were placed in the police car, tears in her eyes but with a sense of relief for having done the right thing. They left the place with James, ready to start a new chapter in her life away from the shadows of the past. The days after Richard and Helen's arrest were filled with mixed emotions. Despite the relief and sense of justice, there was a persistent sadness in Sarah's heart for her parents' situation. To try to clear her mind and find some normalcy, James suggested they start planning their wedding, an event they hoped would be a new beginning full of hope and joy. Together, they dedicated themselves to the planning, choosing each detail with care and affection. They decided on a simple but elegant outdoor ceremony, taking advantage of the natural beauty of a local garden that Sarah had always adored. The discussions about flowers, music, and guests brought moments of lightness and connection, allowing both to distract from the recent painful memories. The wedding day arrived quickly, and it was a clear, sunny day, as if the weather itself wanted to offer the best for the occasion. Sarah was dazzling in a flowing wedding dress with delicate details, and James, always elegant, wore a tailored suit that perfectly complemented his appearance. The ceremony was intimate, with close friends and family who unconditionally supported the couple. They exchanged heartfelt and moving vows, pledging love, loyalty, and a shared future, regardless of the challenges that might arise. After the ceremony, while guests enjoyed the reception, James and Sarah stepped aside for a moment alone. Sitting under an old oak tree, they reflected on the recent events. "You know, Sarah, despite everything, I feel these trials have strengthened us, brought us closer," James said, holding her hand. Sarah nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's true, and despite the pain, I believe we've found our own justice. Now we need to focus on our future, on building the family we've always dreamed of," she replied, a shy smile forming on her lips. The comfortable silence between them was a testament to the mutual understanding and complicity they had developed. And speaking of family, Sarah began hesitantly but with a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "I discovered something yesterday that will change our lives even more." James looked at her curiously. "What is it you need to tell me so urgently? You know I don't like waiting for surprises." "I feel anxious, especially after what we've been through recently," he confessed. "I'm pregnant, James. We're going to have a baby, our own child, and we're going to form a beautiful family together," she revealed, her voice filled with joy and a bit of nervousness about the new responsibility. James' reaction was immediate, his eyes lighting up as he pulled her into a tight embrace. "That's incredible, Sarah. I couldn't be happier. We're going to be parents," he laughed, the sound filling the air around them with pure happiness. After the tumultuous events leading to her parents' imprisonment, Sarah found herself at a crossroads of emotions and decisions. The pain of family betrayal was deep, but she knew she couldn't let the shadow of her parents' mistakes define her future. With firm resolve, she decided it was time to cut ties and start a new chapter in her life, a chapter focused on healing and contribution. Inspired by James' unwavering support, Sarah immersed herself in social projects, particularly those aimed at environmental protection and animal rehabilitation, a direct reflection of her parents' crimes. She became an active figure in various NGOs, using her experience and resources to make a difference. James, for his part, stood by her side every step of the way, offering not only financial support but also his time and energy. Together, they participated in awareness campaigns, helped with fundraising, and volunteered at animal shelters. As Sarah became more involved with community work, she felt she was somehow redeeming her family's image, transforming the legacy of greed into one of generosity and care. She sought not recognition but the inner peace that came from knowing she was doing the right thing. Meanwhile, in prison, Richard and Helen faced the consequences of their choices. Separated from their life of luxury and forced to confront the reality of their actions, both went through moments of deep reflection. Initially, they were defensive and bitter, blaming James for their misfortunes. However, over time and many conversations between them, they began to recognize their mistakes. Slowly, they started participating in rehabilitation programs offered in the prison, including courses on ethics and social responsibility, hoping to one day reconcile with their daughter. Back with James and Sarah, they were finalizing preparations for a major fundraising event for the new animal reserve they were helping establish. The event would be a celebration of progress and renewal, symbolizing their shared journey of growth and commitment to causes greater than themselves. On the night of the event, as guests began to arrive, Sarah looked at James, gratitude and love reflected in her eyes. "Without you, I would never have been able to overcome all this. You have shown me what it means to truly love, not just a person but an entire community," she said. James, taking her hand, responded with a warm smile. "And you have taught me the power of redemption and forgiveness. Together, we're building something that will last much longer than us." The event was a resounding success, with donations exceeding all expectations. As the night fell and the soft music resonated in the background, James and Sarah danced together, their hearts light with the satisfaction of a job well done and the promise of a bright future not only for them but for the community and the world around them. If this story captured your interest, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is vital so that we can continue bringing captivating stories frequently. Stay tuned so you don't miss the next exciting narrative that will soon come to your screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Until next time.